Begin Self-Publishing Episode 109, Writing and Pitching Screenplays with Charles Harris.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
Now, I've met Charles Harris quite a few times in real life, mainly through the Alliance of Independent Authors meetup group in London. He's given training about how to pitch to the group, and he's also vastly experienced in terms of writing and pitching screenplays. He's now moving over more into the world of fiction. He's written and had published the first of his fiction books, which is a satire book called The Breaking of Liam Glass. Now, this interview was recorded sometime in the past, as for once, I'm actually ahead of schedule. So some of the references to, say, the screenwriting festivals and things will have happened in the past. So for those of you who are time sensitive, you may discover that there's the odd reference to things in the future that is actually in the past now. But that's part of the fun of the whole podcasting medium. I'm sure there's probably going to be people listening in 2020 to this podcast and thinking, well, no, actually the International Screenwriting Festival is actually next week. Not realising that it was about 5 years ago that this show was recorded. So anyway, I think this is quite an interesting and good interview about screenplay writing. So now over to the interview with Charles. Hello, Charles. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tim. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. What is the biggest difference between writing screenplays and other types of writing?
I suppose the main difference is to be aware it's not really writing. I mean, it is writing, of course, because using words, but the thing to be aware of is firstly that film and TV are a very different art form. They might look like, superficially, like either novels or plays, but they're as different as an opera from a play, for example. If you're thinking of comparing like with like, it's like comparing like Shakespeare's Othello with Verdi's Othello. They are totally different animals. And a screenplay isn't even the film or the TV program. It's a blueprint. So people who approach it in a writerly sense, and I speak as an author and a writer who's written just about everything. I've written films, I've written documentaries, I've written TV, I've written non-fiction, as you know, about screenplay writing, and I've now written a novel and some short stories. And the thing is, I say there's nowhere to hide in screenplay writing. You're writing. Do you remember back in I think it was the 60s, they had these happenings where people would sort of put on an event, and that was the kind of the beginning of a kind of artistic movement we see more of nowadays, where it's what people do rather than necessarily how they do it. And a screenplay is a bit like that. You're writing a blueprint for an event. It's almost like you're preparing a party and inviting the guests, and the screenplay is the kind of the plan for the party. But then the guests arrive, and the party itself develops in whatever way it does. You've got to have the peanuts and the crisps and the egg sandwiches, whatever you're providing, and the beer. But that's just the foundation of the whole thing. And the difference is from that, for example, when we're writing a novel or a short story, there the writing itself becomes very important. In a screenplay, it's not about being clever. In fact, you can't hide away through a bit of purple prose or a clever bit of writing. You can't escape from dramatic problems. They are very much there in front of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So obviously, as you mentioned, you moved from basically you've written screenplays and you've written books about screenplays, and now you've written a satire book. What kind of drove you to make that journey? Was it just a case of you wanted to experience writing different things, or was it there more freedom in your eyes in what you would call a traditional novel rather than a screenplay?
There's a lot more freedom. For one thing, you're doing it yourself. Stanley Kubrick had a lovely description of making a movie, which is it's like painting the Mona Lisa on a roller coaster with 15 other people holding the paintbrush. So the great thing about writing a novel is you don't have to get it financed. You don't have to do what the producer says. The actors do what you tell them to do, mostly. If you want it to snow, it snows. You are kind of like making the movie on the page. I never thought of myself as a writer originally. I started off as a amateur filmmaker, and then I became a film editor, a director. But I needed scripts to direct, and I couldn't afford to hire anybody else. That was the cheapest writer I could find. So I basically taught myself to write, as it were. I did it, and it felt strange because my first language, in a way, was visual. That's what I always did. Screenwriting, making screen storytelling is a visual medium, which is something I talk about in a second. Then the writing side became more and more interesting. I actually started to enjoy it more and more. And I enjoyed the bits that never come through, because, of course, if you've ever seen a screenplay, 50% of it is the dialogue, which may or may not be in the final film, depending on whether the actors and the director decide to use the words you've written. 50% of it is the other stuff, the descriptions, which will never actually be in the film. You see what's being described, but you don't read the words, and that's a fundamental difference.
Okay, so let's start with a fairly basic question. How long normally is a screenplay for, say, a film or a TV series?
The first thing to say is screenplays are measured in pages, not words. It's very unusual, unlike novels and short stories, to ever talk about how many words. So, and they roughly go a page a minute. If they're laid out in the correct way, and that's another thing, there's a very, very rigid formula how you lay out a screenplay for all kinds of reasons. You should use the same font, usually it's Courier font, in a particular kind of layout. And that works out a page a minute. So the 90-minute film would be about 90 pages, 100-minute film, 100 pages. In this country, people generally prefer screenplays, first drafts, to be around 99 pages, because it shows that the writer hasn't been kind of going off onto great sort of florid bits of purple prose. In the States and in other countries, they're a little bit more relaxed about first draft screenplays, on the understanding you can always cut them down. But you're talking there about something around 15,000 words plus. A screenplay roughly between 15 to 25,000 words, which is a very tiny amount. I say writing screenplay is like writing haiku for 90 pages. You have a minimum amount of words to get across your feeling. Your average scene will have maybe 4 lines of dialogue. It doesn't feel like that when you're watching it, but it's because there's all sorts of other things going on around and beyond the dialogue that make it very different from both a novel and a play. Okay,
I've noticed when I've been looking at your website, you've got quite a few articles about screenplays and things like that, but there's this something called a treatment, which seems to be like a short version. What is a treatment, and what are your tips for people writing one?
Well, there actually we are very close to the sort of writing that novelists will be used to, because basically a treatment is just another word for an outline or a synopsis. It's how you're going to treat the story. There are various kinds of more kind of highfalutin treatments, but the basic treatment is just an outline of your story in X number of pages, whatever's been asked for. You will find some screenwriting people who say, a treatment means this number of pages, a synopsis means this number of pages. They're lying to you. There is no official definition of how long a treatment or synopsis or outline should be. They're just interchangeable words. And if anyone asks you for one, the first thing to ask is how long? And that's what you deliver, that or slightly shorter. You do not ever deliver anything that's longer than that. And just like I would imagine your average novel outline, it's it's always going to be in the third person. You could have a novel in the first person. It's going to be in the present tense, and it has the beginning, middle, and end. And most importantly, and most challengingly, because it's the bit that seems to throw a lot of people, the parts of your treatment should be more or less in proportion to your story. And that's always a challenge, because most people find they have a lot to say at the beginning. So the average treatment I read, you might have a 2-page treatment, for example, that has the first page and a half is the first 30 minutes of the movie. The next hour is squeezed into a paragraph, and the final climax is kind of like last line of the page. And I can understand why people do that, because you've got to explain this. There's Tim, and he's that kind of person. There's Charles, and he's that kind of person. And But actually, no, you mustn't do that. You've got to find a way of getting it across. It should be readable, and it should feel like you're watching the movie or watching a TV program. Otherwise, you have the sense of seeing it. And that, one of the things I started to talk about, the visual side of screenplay writing, people have a kind of misunderstanding. They think of movies and TV as being visual, which is true. Obviously, they are visual. But it doesn't mean that your story has to be kind of gung-ho action, or necessarily the gung-ho action will necessarily translate well onto the screen, just because it appears to be visual. It's not visual in the sense of having to have lots of big, glossy visual scenes, it means that your story has to play out in a form that we can film. In other words, can be visualizable. You make things work in the concrete visual realm in front of a camera. In a novel, you can say things like he was frightened or she fell in love with. In a film, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, you can say it in dialogue or in voiceover, but that doesn't really have the same effect. You have to see it happening. So when we say visual, that could mean 12 members of a jury in a room. As long as what's playing out, the drama that's playing out between them, is dramatized in such a way that we can film it and see it on camera. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I do. Yeah.
That's the thing that trips a lot of people up when they're thinking, as I'm sure a lot of novelists do think, well, it would be great, I'd love to sell my story to TV or to film. And one of the big problems often is there isn't necessarily something going on, enough going on outside someone's head. And that, as I say, doesn't necessarily mean you can't, shoot 'em ups and car chases and things like that. It means that you're progressing the drama through what we see.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about treatments now. Obviously, a treatment is probably something that you would send somebody who is asked for it, who might be interested in your screenplay, whether you've written it or not. Who, in the first instance, should someone consider pitching their screenplay to if they've written one or they want to write a treatment and send it to somebody?
Okay, well, firstly, it depends on what you mean by in the first instance. In the very first instance, where you don't have a script yet, the person you must never pitch to is the person who might buy it.
Yeah.
And the reason is that they'll only give you one chance. And if they like it, a pitch, people talk about the pitch, the elevator pitch and so forth. It is a crucial part of film and TV. It's also quite important in fiction writing and in non-fiction writing, in that you still have to boil your idea down into a short sentence. The chance are it's more likely to give you an email than in a verbal pitch, but it's still a pitch, a log line as we call it in film. And the point of that is you're not going to sell it on the basis of that. You're never going to sell your script unless if you've got no track record on the basis of your pitch. The aim of a pitch is to get someone to say, send me the script. That's the total and utter aim of the thing. And if you're going to do that, you've got to have the script ready to send. I actually had a commission once to do a rewrite on a lovely feature idea. Someone had gone down to Cannes, a producer, gone down, and she'd made the cardinal error, though she had a lot of experience, of pitching it to two financiers who loved the idea and then said, show me the script. And she said, well, I haven't written it yet. Went back, commissioned it. By the time she came back with the draft, one of them had invested the money. It was a year later. One of them invested the money somewhere else. One of them had given up film finance entirely. So she had to start all over again. The other danger also is you go back to somebody and they say, yes, I liked that last year, but it sounds a bit old-fashioned now, because they've been living with the idea in their head for a year. So what you do, but you still need to pitch. It's a good idea to try things out, bounce things on people. So I would say you pitch to everybody else. You pitch to your friends, which in case you kind of do anyway. Because at the moment somebody says, well, what are you working on? You either say, oh, well, I'm kind of doing something and go and crawl off into a corner. Or you say, well, I've got this great idea I'm working on. And if you're lucky, they say, tell me about it. And you do in ideally no more than 2 sentences before they suddenly get a subsequent engagement and realize that life's too short to hear me verbal on. So, you pitch to everybody, you bounce ideas off, and what you're looking for is what I call the spark. I used to go around pitching when I began in the industry. I was pitching all over the place. I pitched to everybody. I pitched to producers, I pitched to agents, and nobody got it because clearly the British film industry had no idea of how clever I was. Then one day I was, because you find when you're pitching, you tend to alter it slightly. You think about it and you might, in the excitement, mention something slightly different. And I said something and someone's eyes lit up. And I realized that spark, as I call it, was the thing I'd been looking for. That moment, because friends can say, yes, oh yeah, very nice. But you know when their eyes light up when an idea really works. And that's what you're looking for. So you go around and I actually don't start writing until I've got a pitch I'm happy with. Because the first person I have to convince is worth spending time and money on it is myself. I just realized I didn't answer the second half of your question. So once you've got your script, then you start doing your research. What you want to do is you want to pitch to producers. And it's very similar to pitching a novel. You find a producer who's done the kind of thing that you think is in the right genre, the right area, or an agent if you're looking for an agent. And in a way, it's actually sometimes easier than in publishing to pitch directly to producers because they are all looking for material. And some will say only through an agent, but there's fewer of them. and you do your research, you find out where they are. You always try to send your material to somebody by name rather than a generic, Mr. Producer. And you have to do a fair bit of legwork to get to the right people.
Okay. So, yeah, in the first instance means anybody until you're happy that your pitch is right and it's a good idea to actually write a script. And then you will be finding out who has produced something similar or in that sort of genre and then be sending it to them.
Yes, then what you're doing, you've got the script by now. And then you, as you say, you find someone who's working that genre, and often you'll find they go to film events. Often, if they're releasing a film event, they'll be on doing a Q&A and things like that, or film festivals. There's a great one coming up called the London Screenwriters Festival, which is, if anyone who's close to London, it's well worth going to. You get a lot of people, and we'll be there. I'm there with my hat as Euroscript, giving feedback. And that's the other thing, you do need professional feedback, whether it's a script or a pitch or treatment. It's a collaborative art. It's another major difference. You need feedback on your story. You need to hear how other people think of it.
Okay. So when somebody's thinking about pitching, how should they prepare their pitch? What sort of things should they be thinking about?
What they need is fundamentally is a log line, which is your elevator pitch, 1 to 2 sentences. And what you need is to get the essence. Now, I go into a lot more detail. There's quite a lot of detail in my Jaws and Space book. But essentially, you're looking for what is it the person at the other end is listening for. And part of it, obviously, is it suitable for them? I do this sort of ABCDE thing. A, is it appropriate? Is it appropriate for them? Is it right for them? Which is partly research and partly listening, actually having a conversation. Pitching is a conversational thing. It's not about being very clever or particularly, sort of brilliant. It's about having a chat with somebody. And I would never go in, when I'm pitching, I would never go and pitch first off because I want to hear a bit about them. Partly because it makes them feel human, and some of them actually are human. And partly because that's where you find out what they really want, because it may not be what you're expecting. And you need to be able to think on your feet, a lot of thinking on your feet as a filmmaker. Can I tell you a story? It comes actually from the Jaws and Space book. One of my writers went in and they went into a Hollywood office to pitch, and they had this, I can't remember exactly what the genre was, but it was something like science fiction animation. And they're sitting down, and the people at the other end of the desk say, "Great to see you. And by the way, I hope you haven't got science fiction animation, because that's exactly what we've been fed up with back teeth with." So now he's thinking, God, what do I do? So starts talking about, they'd had this really awful move. They'd moved house a couple of days before, and it really everything you could imagine went wrong. So while they're busy trying to think, they're chattering away about this move they had, and they sort of 5-10 minutes go while they natter about this, and they sort of, the other people are laughing and putting in their own ideas and so forth, and their own sharing experiences, and finally gets to the point after 10 minutes saying, okay, now I've got to fess up. I've got a science fiction animation story. At which point they stand up, shake his hand, and say, great, we really want to see this script about the LA move from hell.
Yes.
Do send it.
Yeah.
So you had to rush off and write the thing.
Yeah.
Which is another rule, which is make sure when you get out afterwards is that you write down everything that's been said, because I can guarantee that there's another person in the book who said that they got out and 24 hours later they couldn't remember what it was, the brilliant idea they came up with that everybody loved. They couldn't remember to save their lives. So you listen, you have a conversation, and then B is a horrible word, it's budgetable, but it fits in with the ABCD. And it basically means the way we do film budgets is not what you'd think. It's not that you kind of look at how much it's going to cost to make. It's how much you're going to make by selling it.
Yeah.
And that basically means you multiplex or indie, is it big budget or micro budget? There's not a lot in the middle at the moment. And knowing what your story is in that terms, because multiplex doesn't necessarily mean bad. It means, and there's some great movies that run for multiplex. It means broad brush appeal, mostly 14 to 24-year-olds with a few older people, big emotions, something that will appeal to usually you need at least a couple of stars to open the movie, or some big special effects. Indie doesn't necessarily mean things that didn't work at the multiplex. That has its own requirements, usually director-led rather than star-led, more kind of abrasive or stylish, or it's got a particular point to make. So, where are you, and what is your audience? Something that, again, was not unfamiliar, I'm sure, to novelists, knowing who your reader is. Though there is one fundamental difference when you're pitching. I've read a lot of people who say with novels and fiction writers, non-fiction writers, that you are expected to say, well, it's like this, and it's good, this is the audience, and this is the kind of money it's going to make, and so forth. You never do that. You let the producer work that out for themselves. You need to know what your market is. You let them do the thinking. It's implied in what you say. C is for cinematic. In other words, what we were talking about before, is it going to work on screen? Which is all we're talking about, it works in the visual realm, and also has a strong structure, because a novel, a short story, a play can get away with a kind of slightly rambling structure for a lot of different reasons, not least that the reader can put the book down, or the actors can adjust. If they feel the audience is a bit slow on a Monday evening, they can speed up and sort of push it, or if the audience is getting a bit hyper, they can slow things down. Film can't do that. So you need a strong structure that will hold, whether it's in the Odeon, Leicester Square, or the Ritzy in sort of Little Puddling Duck on a wet Wednesday afternoon, all comes out on Netflix. So cinematic or televisual. D is for different, which is interesting. I've seen the majority of scripts I've seen that have failed despite being well written fail because they're just like everybody else's. There's nothing different about them. To which you might well say, but I see films at the cinema all the time and they're all like each other. So yes, but they've got people who will write those kind of things already. What they're looking for in someone new, some fresh blood, is someone who brings something fresh and different. They might later on try to make you like everybody else. That's a problem you deal with when you've already got a check in your hand. So D is for different, and E is for employable. In other words, what are you bringing to the table? Why are you the best writer to write this? And I always recommend people have their own personal logline. So something that says what they do, what they have. And I've heard you on your own podcasts in the past talking about similar things like developing a blog, developing a platform which shows that you have a relationship with your material. And it works. In your case, I think you're talking about a little bit about talking to readers, but it works equally with producers and agents. You are the person, you are the expert in miniature railways, for example, so that your story of miniature railways, your film about railways, has an extra oomph to it. Also means it's easier for them to publicize. And I mean, talking about railways, an exact example is a Ken Loach film called The Navigators, which was written by a guy who'd never written a film script in his life before. But he went to Ken Loach's company and said, look, I've worked on the railways. I know these stories inside out. I know these people. And they said, great, we've got people who can write. What we don't have is people who know the railways. We'll put you together with people who will show you how to write a screenplay, because he had the E, he had the employable bit, he had the special thing that made him the ideal writer for that script. A, B, C, D, E.
Okay.
And you have to kind of somehow boil all that down to 2 sentences. But then you can do it in 3 words. Jaws in Space more or less does that. I mean, Jaws in Space was the pitch for Alien. But it does that. If you think about it, you could quite clear what the genre is. Therefore, you know where it's appropriate. If the company that they were pitching to was interested in that kind of space horror movie, the budget is obviously going to be big, but on the other hand, it's a big idea that could probably take it. Is it cinematic? Yes, it creates pictures in my mind, which is what your picture needs to do. It needs to create pictures in the listener's mind. I'm obviously not going to get the exact pictures, but I can start seeing possibilities. Is it different? Yes, we'd had Jaws, but not Jaws in Space. And the only bit that was missing from that was where they employable. Well, yes, they had actually already written a couple of, it was just 2 people who pitched this, a couple of screenplays that had done quite well. So that became Alien. And the story is the guy got out his checkbook and said, write me that script.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to slightly modify what the question I was going to ask you next, because you've more or less gone through it. But with that, let's stick with that example of Alien then. I mean, they presumably didn't just walk in there and say, it's Jaws in Space. And that was that. What kind of process would it, I mean, if you were trying to pitch exactly the same script and let's say Alien didn't exist, just take us through what the process would be in terms of meeting these producers.
Well, I don't know how they made contact, but obviously that's part of your research. You find out where they are, you narrow them down, you might grab them at a cocktail party. You obviously don't pitch straight off. You might say, look, can I come and meet you in an office or sometime or other, or have we got something I think you'd be really interested in? And you go around and Film festivals are great for that because they're people are ready to be pitched to, and you even get speed pitching events set up, like they do at London Book Fair. And so it could be any one of those sort of things. And you walk in, and like I say, the first thing you do is not pitch. When I went first with my fellow producers on Paradise Grove, the movie I made, and we went to Cannes, we walked into people and we said, "So how's the festival been?" And you could see them kind of look at you. It's a strange, like, this person thinks I'm a human being. I mean, people who used to being pitched to non-stop suddenly kind of loosen up a bit, and they have a chat, and you chat for a bit, and you say, "Well, how's things doing? What kind of things are you working on at the moment?" That's where you discover that the rom-com company that you're going to pitch a rom-com to actually has decided to do horror films instead, and quickly rethink. And at a certain point, they will turn around to you and they will say, "Okay, what have you got?" At which point you say, and my pitches always start with "It's a," because then I know my first 3 words. It's a. I mean, you occasionally get the little beautiful Jaws in Space type pitches where, everything fits into a couple of words, but I wouldn't try for that. I do a conversational sentence, and I'll just say, it's a particular kind of story about this particular kind of person, and I'll give a hint at the character journey. And what they're trying to do, they're out inner and outer goals in the story, because that's what you really want to get across. So, for example, it's a space, it's a science fiction adventure story about a woman who finds it very difficult to stand up for herself, who finds she's being chased by a homicidal robot who's trying to kill all the people with her name, which is obviously Terminator.
Yeah.
And that's basically that's the kind of most of my logline. I'll then usually try and tie it up with a little bit at the end, which gives a sense of where of the journey, ideally in a kind of ironic way, by saying something like, "And by the end, she's become a better killing machine than he was." It kind of ties it on a little bow and gives a sense of the journey she's been on, because that's what we're interested in. And it applies a lot. It applies to documentaries and non-fiction as well, to a large extent. And then you stop, because it's a conversation, and if you don't stop, they don't get a chance to get their side of the conversation and say, "Well, tell me more," or "Tell me about it," or "That's interesting, homicidal robot," or and you get into a conversation. What you don't do is the dreaded and then.
Yeah.
That's a killer. That's for the treatment. Even the treatment shouldn't be and then, because you want to have more character and flavour than that. But you talk, and you might give a bit of a trailer. You say, "Well, this is a moment when this happened, an exciting, wonderful scene where this happens," and then we discover more about her when she does this, and you paint out the scenes, the characters. It's characters fundamentally that people are interested in.
Talking about coming to an end, I think we've more or less covered everything about screenplays and pitching them. How can people find out about Charles Harris and the things that you do?
Well, the best place to find me is on my website, which is www.charles-harris.co.uk. I'm also on Twitter at Chaz Harris. But, and I've got a Facebook profile, which has got a horrendously long number, and a Facebook page, which is Charles Harris 008. I've never worked out what the difference in the profile of the page is. One day maybe I'll learn these sort of things. But they're all accessible also. They're all accessible through the website, charles-harris.co.uk, which has got everything about my screenwriting books, and the novel, which My Little Baby, which I'm very proud of, and me, and loads of articles about all sorts of aspects of screenwriting, and I do quite a few book reviews at the moment, which is quite fun.
Okay, well, it was great to have you on the show today, Charles.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.